Welcome back. In this video, we're going to take care of saving the game state. So we're going to store the values of what houses we have, so what the building's level is, how much money we have, and so forth. So let's go ahead and create the right code for that. Because each time we open a game, we don't want to start from scratch, because now that's the case, right? Every single time we start the game, everything is lost. All the data is lost. Well, we still have our manager, which is good, but everything else is lost. So what we want to do is we want to call a method that will store it every time that, for example, the event on application quit will be called. So the thing is, this will work for our PC, but this won't work for mobile because the game process will be killed before we manage to save. But we can use on application pause. This is another event because this event will be called before our game closes on mobile devices as well. This is why we will use both of these methods to save our data and money on both the editor and mobile devices. So in our money manager script, let's go ahead and create a new method. So here, money manager, and I'm not using this update method, so I can actually get rid of it. So I'm going to, for now, just save the amount of money that I have. And I'm going to use this method, which uses the player prefs, and it's going to set the string with money and money to string, and then make sure that the player prefs will save it because the game will close soon. Okay, player pref save straight away. So that's how we can store the money that we have, which is this property that we created earlier, right? This big integer, and it will store it now in our player prefs, which is fine, as a string, of course, right? But we also need to add two methods that we talked about earlier, which is one, the on application pause, which is great for mobile devices. So here there's this method called on application pause, and it's, by the way, it's there, right? So you can just search for, you see, on application quit. The same goes for this on application pause. So if you were to enter on application, you will find this method here, and that's the one that I have prepared here. So once that is called, if we pause the game, we want to save the money. So we want to call this method here, which will save the money. But then there is this other method that will be called inside of our editor, and that is on application quit. So once the application is quit, so closed, so to speak, we're going to save the money also. So now in the start method, we need to get the string that we saved, if we did save it, and parse it into a big integer. And if we never saved the money before, so we played the game for the first time, we will just return 0. So let's go to our start method, and here we set the money to 0. So let's override that and instead get the value from our player prefs. So what we're going to do is we get the money from our player prefs, and because it is a big int, we need to convert it into a string. So here we'll get the player prefs at the position money, and as a default value, we're going to set it to 0. So now we're not getting integers or doubles, we're getting a string. And then we parse that number, which is in form of a string, into a big integer, and then we store it inside of money. So that's just the way how we are going to do it, because save money, you see here, stores the data at the position of money with the value of the money as a string, not as a big integer, because player prefs cannot handle big integers, doesn't know what big integers are. So you cannot use it for complex information. So now if we save our game, and so now if we save the script and go back to Unity and test the game, we should be able to store the value. So let me get some money and let me collect it. Actually, let me change the aspect ratio to landscape real quick. So now I have 7 gold, right? And now let me stop the game. Let me run the game again. And I will see that I still have my gold. So I still have my 8 euros, but I don't have anything else. So the building is gone. How do I take care of the building? Well, we need to use a different approach here. So of course we could store information about the building ID in the player prefs and so forth, but that's really not the good way. So there are better ways to do it. They're a little more complicated, but they are the best practices. So what we're going to do is, so we are just going to use JSON here for. And by the way, if you want to reset your player prefs, you can go over to clear all player prefs here, click on yes, run it again, and then you will have €0 once again. So all of your player prefs will be reset. You see the game manager or the collector is also gone. So when it comes to saving the building data, we want to save a couple of things. So the building level, the current building profit, as well as whether the building is unlocked or not. Because if we look at our buildings here, we have the building level, the profit multiplier, as well as we need to know whether the building is active or not. Now the issue is that we need to save this for each building, and using player prefs to save each of those would make it too complicated and really messy, because we have 3 different buildings. And now imagine we have, well, we want to extend this game and want to have 20 different buildings, then it would really become a lot more complicated. So let's take care of that using JSON, as I said. Before we can do that, however, we need to make sure that we have an ID for each of the buildings. So let's go to our building script here, and let's add this serialized field private integer ID. So it will contain the ID of the building that we're currently looking at. So building 1, building 2, and building 3, they will have unique IDs. So we can just go ahead and say building 1 has the ID of 0, building 2 has the ID of 1, and building 3 has the ID of 2. Now you could of course give them the IDs 1, 2, 3, but usually when you're using IDs you start counting at 0. Now we will use this ID to load the correct building data for each building. And now the next thing is we are going to require this little tool here, JSON.NET for Unity. So this tool will allow us to use JSON inside of our project. So let's go ahead and add this asset to our project now. Let's open it in Unity. And then once we have loaded the package in Unity, let's download it and import it. So I'm going to import the entire package. All right, now let's go ahead and create a new file in here, a new script. And I'm going to call this one building data. Okay, now let me open up this building data, and it will not inherit from mono behavior. So it will not have the option to use this start and update method. We will, however, need to add JSON here at the top. So let's add this newtonsoft.json namespace as well as the system namespace. And now we need to add the data that we want to save. This is the data that we will get per building when we give the ID as a key. So let me drag that in here. You see we have the isUnlocked boolean with the getter and setter, then the integer about the building level, as well as the string that contains the profit. Because the profit is such a big number, it's easier to store it in a string. Now also something really important, we need to make this class serializable. If you want to store a value in JSON format, you need to make this class serializable, which will basically convert it into a string kind of thing. Okay, so this class, as you see here, might look simple in the format of the words that we see here, but if we want to save the class, we cannot save it as an object of the class, but we need to save it in a format that is JSON compatible. And for it to be JSON compatible, we need to serialize this class into a format that will then work. So into a text kind of format where we can see, okay, isUnlocked is for example 5, building level is for example 3, but it also contains the details about those levels in more depth. And then it's going to then contain this information. So we need to add the serializable for this building data to be, well, serializable for JSON. So it can serialize it. And then we will need a constructor that will build the data. So a constructor is a method that is called once an object of that building data is created, or of that class that we're using the constructor in is created. A constructor doesn't return anything. It is going to be public, and it has the exactly same name as the class itself. So here we're passing the boolean isUnlocked as well as the int building level, as well as the profit. So whenever we're creating an object of the building data, we need to pass this information. So we need to pass whether it's unlocked, the building level, and the profit, and those will then be stored inside of this object for those properties that we have here. So for the is unlocked property, for the building level property, and for the profit property. So basically, when we're creating an object, we need to give all of this information, and then the object will be this information. And now we need two methods. A method that will take an object of the building data and will return it as a string in JSON format. This will be our save method. And then we need a method that will take a string in JSON format and will return an object of building data. This will be our load method. So let's first of all look at the save data. So this here will create a JSON file in text format, in string format, from our building data. So we're passing the building data, and then we're converting it into a JSON string using this JSON convert.serialize object building. And then we need to do the same thing to create a building from JSON. So let's do that. It will be this method here. So a public static building data method. So it will return a building data type of object. And we call this method create building from JSON. We pass a JSON string to it, and then we convert the JSON string into building data. So here we're making a string out of building data. As I said, of a class, we're making a string that will be in the format of JSON. And here we're converting it from the format of a JSON string into a format of a building data object. So we're deserializing the object. Here we're serializing it, and here we're deserializing the object. And we're deserializing the object into building data using the JSON string. Now in our building class, we need to save and load the building data on start and app quit, or when the app is paused, just like in our money manager. As we did with our money, we need to save our profits as strings and parse them back to big integers when we load them. In the building class, we need to therefore add a couple of methods. So let's save the building data and let's go over to our building class. And here at the very bottom, well, we don't need the update method. Here, let's save the building data. So let's create this method here. This method, it will do a bunch of stuff. And let's look over it. So first of all, we're going to create a building data object using the current values of our building. So the building data, which is this class that we just created, we're creating an object of it. We're calling it BD, and we're creating a new object of it using this new keyword. Then we're passing the details about whether this building is unlocked. We're passing the building level, and we're passing the profit, but we're making a string out of it because the profit, if we look at it, is this big integer. So we're taking these three values and we're passing them to this building data constructor here. Here you see this building data constructor. You can even see there is a reference now, and it's inside of our building CS, which is exactly here. So this is where we are calling the constructor or passing the data, and then we're using this BD, so this building data, to create a JSON from it. So we are calling this create JSON from building method from our building data class. So this one here, we're using it, and it will return a string that will be of type JSON, and I'm going to call it JSON. So it will not be of type JSON, but it will be in the format of JSON. And then we are storing the player prefs string at the position of building plus ID as a JSON. So we're still using player prefs, but we cannot store the objects as player prefs. So we need to bring them into a format of a string so that we can then store them in the player prefs. And that's what we have done. And once we did that, we save it. So now we need to do the same thing the other way around if we want to load the data. So if we want to load the data, now we're getting the data as a string. So let's look over it step by step. Let me actually get rid of this code here, so not to confuse you. So first of all, we have this new method, load building data. So this will try and load the building data. If we never saved this building before, it will return an empty string. So what it will do is it will create this new string called JSON. It will go to the player prefs, so our permanent storage, so to speak. It will get the string at the position of building with the ID. So every single building, as we have seen, has an ID assigned to it, right? So we are getting the details of building 1. So you see that has the ID of 0. This has the building ID of 1. And this one has the ID of 2. So we're getting those. And if they are empty, we're just going to say, okay, there was no data stored there. So now in the next step, we are creating a building data object. And at the beginning, we're going to say, okay, this building data object is going to be empty. It's going to be null. And then we're checking if the JSON format was just empty, so there was no data stored. So if the JSON equals an empty string, then we're going to say that the building data should just be a new building data where the building was not created, while the building level, this one here, is 1, and where the profit is 0. So we didn't make any profit, and we're not making any profit from this building. Okay, so that's the case if we got the building data, but there was no data in it. So it was empty, so to speak. But now, if we get data, so in the else case, and the JSON wasn't empty, let's create a building from that string. So now we're using this method that we just created in our building data script. We're just converting it from a string back into a building data object. So it's like when you are going through a wormhole, then the wormhole decomposes you entirely, and then it brings you back together afterward. So that's what we're doing. We're decomposing the object entirely, or we're deconstructing it entirely, and then we're reconstructing it afterward. So now what is it that we want to actually set? Well, we want to set the building data. So we want to set the is unlocked of our building. So is this building unlocked or not? If that's so, well, we get the data from our BD is unlocked. Then our building level, let's get that as well. And we get that from our BD.building level. And then finally our profit, let's set that. And as this is a big integer, we need to parse it from BD profit, because our profit here is saved as a string, but in our building class, the profit is of type big integer here. Okay, and that is it. That should store our project, but of course we need to load those methods or call these methods. So save building data and load building data, because we're never actually using them. So let's use them. Therefore, I'm going to create a new method in here, or call a new method. So there's this awake method. We saw it earlier. It's called just before the start method of a script. So here I'm just going to load the building data. And then we also need to make sure if the application pauses. So let me check if we have this on application. We don't have it here. Okay. So then we need to make sure that we do the same thing as we did in our money manager here, where we had at the bottom, I believe, this on application pause and on application quit. We need to do the same things. So let's go over to our building and call those two methods. And here, instead of saving the money, we're going to save the building data. And the same goes here, save building data. So not save money, but save the building data. All right, and now let's actually test the game. So this was quite an extensive lecture. We went into a very deep concept here with serializing and all of the good stuff. So let's run the game. And let's purchase something. So we have this building, right? And once I have enough, let me actually buy a little bit of gold. 100K. So as you see, it didn't work at the first time, but it worked at the second. So let me upgrade my building here. Let's purchase this one. And so 13 and 8. Okay, so we have those two buildings, and we have 13 and 8, 94,000. So let's stop the game. Let's run the game once again. and we should have 94,000. The two buildings are there. 13 and 8 are the levels. So now we are actually storing the data of our game, and let me get some money to purchase this other building. And actually I don't have enough money. So yeah, either way, if we had enough money, we could purchase this other thingy as well. Now let's purchase some gold or some money. And now let's buy this house. Let's collect its money. Let's stop the game. Let's run it again. And we should have all three buildings here with the right level. All right, so that works. I'm happy about that. So see you in the next video, where we're going to finally be able to move around in our map. So change the camera position. So